Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you every Wednesday evening live out of the studios at SPNN in St. Paul. Now tonight we are going to be concluding our three-part series on the news report pertaining to the St. Paul organized trash collection case that was recently heard before the Minnesota Supreme Court. Now, in our first report, we focused on the arguments of the city that were made at the Minnesota Supreme Court. Last week, we focused on the arguments that were made on behalf of the residents of St. Paul and in support of the charter. And now tonight, we're going to hear about what comes after all of this, in that it is going to be put, the question is going to be put on the ballot for this fall to be voted on by the residents of St. Paul, up or down, whether or not the organized trash collection ordinance stays or goes. And so there's questions about, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that the city has to maintain their contract with the consortium? Does it mean that the individual residents in St. Paul will get to decide who they want to contract with themselves and go back to being responsible for their own trash collection rather than having Big Brother Carter take care of it for them? Well, you see, that's the point that we're going to be talking about tonight. And we've got some film footage from the Mayor Carter's press release after it came out that the Minnesota Supreme Court voted in support of the people and the charter of St. Paul and said that the question must be on the ballot. And then we're also going to hear some of the questions that at that Minnesota Supreme Court oral argument, the questions that the justices raised with regard to what comes after the vote, and if the vote is a no vote and the ordinance is thrown out, what then? Well, now to help me with this evening's report is Mr. Greg Copeland, who has been following this subject for quite some time. Thank you, Mr. Copeland, for being here.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Diana, and I'm very happy that you have given so much of your showtime to this very important topic. And folks, it's bigger than garbage. It's all about, I think at this point, our getting our charter back, and the fact that the Supreme Court supported the citizens of this community getting the opportunity to vote as the charter specifies, tells us all we need to know about the rightness of the position of, as our lawyer put it before the Supreme Court, the disenfranchised citizens of St. Paul.
Right, and one of the issues that we brought up last week is that, as you indicated, there's more at the heart of this than just talking about city organized trash.
That's right.
And that conflict between state statute and being a charter city. And when and how do you have a statute and a charter city coexist on an issue such as this? And that prime objective in all of this is the integrity of the charter, because if a statute is found that it can supersede a city's charter, then what's the point of having a charter at all anymore? And then that means that you have now taken away the municipal constitution for all of those cities, about 125 of them in Minnesota, who are governed by a charter, which is and contains the rights of the residents of that community, like St. Paul, for instance.
Exactly. And, you know, frankly, as far as trash collection goes, you know, for over 40 years, the citizens of the city were quite capable, all by themselves, of figuring out how to get the trash, you know, from their home into the can and then into the truck. It really hasn't been a great puzzle. And the cost that people had to bear to figure that out. Was it about half of what we're paying now? And we had the ability to share containers where there was, we were building community and we didn't even know it. We thought we were just saving money and doing what was logical, reducing our costs because we didn't have a lot of trash to put in the can. And then we have a mayor and a council that decide, oh no, we're not going to let you have your community. We're not going to let you make any decisions. We're going to decide for you, raise the prices, and cut back on the service.
Well, in other words, they don't trust the residents of St. Paul to be able to responsibly take care of their own trash and to be able to contract with the trash companies, the local trash companies, to remove that trash. Now, I found in some of our film footage, a couple of the commercial media stations, they did give a couple of minutes to this issue, whereas we've given hours. But KARE 11, they had I thought, a very unique little way of explaining the issue that is going on in St. Paul. So let's take a look at what KARE 11 put together to explain the issue.
St. Paul residents used to choose which garbage company they use, and they'd negotiate their own rates. But the city took away that choice, switching to organized pickup with flat rates. Well, some people are happy that there's less garbage truck traffic in their neighborhoods, but others are upset that the rates went up and they no longer have that choice.
And that, of course, is from KARE 11 News and their description of the organized trash dilemma in St. Paul, in that, some people are looking for there to be less hauling of trucks up and down the streets, and other people are saying, well, we want cost savings. Now, Mr. Copeland, before the program, you and we were talking about, this whole idea that if you want to be having organized trash collection, but you want to be more sustainable, and since St. Paul has alleys, it kind of piggybacks on your idea that you had about how the neighborhood came together and said, well, let's combine our trashes together in one container. Why not just in those alleyways have a couple of dumpsters that everybody on that alley uses? So then that way you don't have 3 different cans at each and every house.
That is a creative solution to a challenge that we all hopefully will have after we defeat the ordinance, because if that's what works on a particular alley and the trash gets to where it needs to go, and it's going right now to Ramsey County at their joint facility with Washington County, and it's turned into fuel to generate electricity for Excel. So if it gets to that point and people want to do it that way, creative solutions to solve problems at the local level, and you can't get much more local than the alley, I think makes a creative community all the better, and not to have all this prescriptive big thumb pushing in a certain direction. And I just got to say, even if a person was in favor of this system, which I am clearly not, what you would never do is give these international companies, Republic and Waste Management, the authority to send your citizens the bills. And then you turn the city itself in its own structuring of the program has turned itself into the collection agency for these 2 international companies that have been buying up all our small family businesses that used to do the work of taking our trash away at half the cost that we're now paying to these companies. Well, so it's a failed enterprise for citizens.
Well, here, now you were saying how, okay, these monopolies are the ones who are sending out the bills, but if the bills aren't paid, then the city gets to be the bill collector. Well, typically, if a business sends out an invoice and they have to collect on those invoices, they incur costs having to do with those collection processes. So it almost sounds like you're telling me that the city then now is incurring those costs with that process. And if that's the case, we've now shifted the collection costs from the private monopoly to the government sector, and that's actually would be corporate welfare going to that corporation, because now they don't have to carry collection costs on the books for those invoices.
And that is exactly what's going on, and worse than that is if you don't have control over the payment structure on the program that you're contracting with a vendor on, how do you get quality assurance? How do you have accountability in the service delivery section of your program and in evaluating your program? You really have lost control, because if these companies know they're going to get paid and they don't have to do a particularly good job at what they're doing, and they can be a little sloppy, and they eliminated all the cost of bad debt, well then, my God, what a welfare program they've got, with the city picking up all those charges.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is very important for the residents to know and to understand, is that all those unpaid bills, the city pays. And then, of course, what the city does is that then they put a lien on that property owner's property, and they certify it as part of the real estate property taxes that are being charged, annually, that go on to that property. But it's the city that's paying that money up front to the company, so the company actually never has a write-off, never, because they are absolutely paid, because the checkbook is open. Now, when CARE 11 was out at the Minnesota Supreme Court building when the oral arguments were going on, afterwards they decided that they would interview a few of the people who were there at the argument to find out what their reaction was to this whole issue and to the arguments of the justices. Let's take a look at one of our clips and see if we recognize this particular individual.
Those costs are double of what they were. That's an unreasonable and ridiculous and unnecessary burden on taxpayers, and we need to end it.
Citizens gathered enough signatures to put the question on the ballot in November, but the St. Paul City Council rejected the petition because they argue they've signed a contract with the trash companies for the new system, and they can't break that contract.
The city argues, and this is indeed what they argued, the whole entire oral argument that they had their time allotted to them was that they have a contract, except that they totally ignored the fact that St. Paul is a charter city, that the residents of St. Paul had a petition that had been certified by Ramsey County as having the proper number of signatures and the proper type of signatures, and that it was indeed a legitimate petition calling for the matter to be put on the ballot. And the City Council of St. Paul just ignored all that, and the very night that they accepted the petition and ignored it, they then voted on approving and moving forward with the contract with the Trash Consortium. Mr. Copeland, I know you've been paying attention to that.
Yes, we have, and it is with great distress. I was 12 years serving as a volunteer. Not one dime did any of us get, the 15 of us on the City Charter Commission. And to have the city council of this city, I mean, it's the governing document. It's what sets out the parameters of their authority, and it sets out the mayor's authority as the chief executive of the city. And how you can throw that in the trash and pretend it doesn't exist when the language of the charter is fairly straightforward. It's not written in legalese. This was written in the 70s progressive era, if you will, and I'll use that loosely, but that's kind of what it was. And frankly, it's not rocket science. And what we did find in our charter history here, and what the lawyers and the court have all said, is that we have a very broad authority as citizens in St. Paul. And you know, when our elected officials don't do what we think they should do, whoever the we is, we the people, whatever particular group of people want to get together and petition within the parameters of the days that are allowed to do that. You get 45 days, I believe it is. So, you know, you can put anything on the ballot. Well, it happens fairly rarely, actually. And so this instance of over 6,000 people signing this petition and gathering those signatures in quick time and fighting the city attorney crowd. I mean, they have a lot of attorneys at the city attorney's office, and they've made the same argument throughout. And Judge Castro, we must remember, District Court Judge Leonardo Castro, he made the point to the city attorney when she was arguing to him about this contract. He said, you didn't have to do it that way, you know? And I'll give you an example. If you remember back to the days when Carl Pohlad was trying to build a baseball stadium in St. Paul, there was a guy named Norm Coleman who was the mayor. And rather than him deciding on his own that that's what we're going to do, period, dot, he embraced the charter and he collected signatures, he and his supporters, for the stadium to put it on the ballot. It went on the ballot and 58% of the people said, you know, we don't want to pay for Mr. Pohlad's stadium, and that was it. Norm accepted that decision and we moved on. So they could have easily put this mandatory collection matter to the people right up front. They didn't have to play all this politics. And it distresses me to see that they're handing all the control over the money to these international companies that frankly have a rather checkered reputation. And how is it that that makes any sense? How is that supportive of, you know, embracing a local capitalism here with family businesses that had done a great job? And, you know, yeah, they had people buy and sell themselves over the years, of course. That's people who went in the business that were new at it. And, but we had people who were doing this for many years, generations of families doing this work in the community. So I think we made a problem out of nothing. I mean, yeah, you know what? The city could have done a little better job dealing with some of the illegal trash, and there's always going to be illegal dumping. I don't care what city you're in. You can have mandatory trash all day long. You ever been to Minneapolis? I mean,
and I would be willing to bet that, you know, Maplewood has organized trash collection, and I would be willing to bet that they have unauthorized dumping there yet as well. That just because you have organized trash collection doesn't mean that you're eliminating unauthorized trash dumping. Now, in our next clip that is from KARE 11 News, this is the other resident that they interviewed, and she had a few comments. Let's listen in.
The citizens' rights to referendum are just being steamrolled by the city.
Supporters of the referendum left the oral arguments energized by the justices' tough questions for the city's lawyer.
There is no language in any of those statutes that you've cited that says the citizens shall have no right to petition for a referendum.
And coincidentally, that was also one of the clips that we played on our show as well, because it really does set the stage for looking at the political and the legal arguments in this case. And it only took the Minnesota Supreme Court about a week to come out with their decision, because there was a deadline that had to be met, that under state statute, anything that's going to be on the ballot had to be submitted to Ramsey County by
the 23rd of August.
The 23rd of August, so that everything is done according to statute on that front. And so everybody was under the deadline of that date. So once the court came out with their decision, then the City Hall decided to have their special meeting, which we covered last week, and then the mayor had his press conference. So let's listen in the beginning, his introduction.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Yesterday, the City of St. Paul received the Minnesota Supreme Court's order to place the ordinance that established rules for coordinated garbage collection on the ballot for citywide vote. We respect the decision from the Supreme Court and appreciate their swift response and attention to this matter. The court issued their decision, but has not yet explained the rationale for their ruling. Our path forward won't be completely clear until we receive that information, but we will abide by the court's final determination. One matter has been decided. The ordinance will be on the ballot this November.
There were a few people at this press conference that were happy that it was going to be on the ballot, and they started clapping when he mentioned that. He was a little taken aback that there was a round of applause for that. I think he looked a little startled that somebody was clapping for that when he feels very badly that that's the way it turned out.
Yeah, the folks on the payroll weren't clapping, though.
No, that's right. So now a couple of things that I want to talk about and to clarify as that came up in that clip. One is that he had indicated that, you know, the Supreme Court, they had their decision, but that they're going to be coming out with a more extended rationale for their decision. And typically when they come out with a decision, they have their memorandum of law and the whole package.
They made a special effort, frankly, on the behalf of as our attorney Greg Joseph loves to mention, the disenfranchised citizens, because as we know, the council and the mayor basically taken our charter and put it in the trash, and then we went to the Supreme Court to take it out of the trash, and they did. And I don't think they're going to tell the mayor any new story. I think they're going to tell the mayor, read your charter, Mr. Mayor. It gives you all the information you need, and the city councilors can do the same thing. It's pretty straightforward.
But it sounds like he's hopeful that somehow or other that when they get the final rationale of the justices, that there's going to be some little hidden secret bullet in there to help St. Paul out of their quandary of what to do with organized trash collection in St. Paul. But that's the other thing that I wanted to address, is that when you go and you argue a case at either the appellate court level or the Minnesota Supreme Court level, they're not looking at every single issue in the case. They're not relitigating it from the beginning. They're not taking in new evidence. You have to tell them exactly which questions you want them to address, the questions that you are appealing from that lower court order. So in this particular case, I think the main question was all about whether or not the question should have been on the ballot rather than not putting it on the ballot. I don't think it was whether or not is St. Paul's contract valid or not. And you see, I think that's a distinction here that, you know, when you listen to his press conference, it's not quite clear what they think they're going to get out of the final memorandum, other than what you indicated, is that it's going to talk about the sanctity of the charter.
Well, I think that's exactly right. The city attorney's office with Judge Castro and the special appellate attorney that they hired, and I don't know what the hourly rate is, but I bet they're getting paid more than the city attorney by a few $100s an hour that we're paying for, the citizens of the city. You know, the argument was always the same. It's the contract, it's the contract. And it was the citizens, folks, that initiated this whole action, and that whole action meaning the charter needs to come into play to be granted recognition of the simple power to repeal an ordinance to void, to make null an ordinance that is passed by the city. And that's what the 6,000 plus people that signed that petition that was passed around wanted, was the opportunity to simply go to the polls and have a vote on that. And the reason that the charter, or rather the question is framed the way it is with a no, is that you, in the charter, if you, this is the last sentence in section 8.05 under referendum, says the ordinance shall not become operative until a majority of those voting on the ordinance vote in its favor. It's as simple as that. So, you know, we're looking at a majority vote. This is not a higher standard than that. And frankly, the mayor kept arguing about his contract.
Right.
Well,
and you know, his press conference was roughly about 6 minutes or so. And what we've done is that we've split it up into about 5 different clips so that we can analyze the different segments of that press release so that you can get the context of what to read between the lines. So let's take a look at the next clip.
St. Paul's current citywide garbage collection will continue. Residents should continue to place their garbage carts out on their scheduled collection day, the same as they've done all year long. In early October, residents will receive their quarterly bill from their hauler and should pay those bills by their October 25th due date. While the election's outcome may impact the rules around our hauling program, the city will continue to ensure that our garbage is picked up both through and beyond Election Day.
So there's a couple of things packed into that. One, that until the vote has come from the residents of St. Paul, we know what the outcome of that vote is. It's business as usual. The city is going to continue to have the consortium collect the trash under the contract. So if you're in St. Paul, you're going to be putting your garbage in that trash container there they gave you. You're going to get your bill from your hauler, and then you got to pay it. And if you don't pay it, then the city will collect it. And if the city can't collect it from you, they'll just put that levy on your property, and you'll get to pay it with your property taxes. So there you go. That's the way it's going to be till the end of the year, pretty much. Well, but then he says that no matter how it turns out with the vote, that the city is going to continue to collect the trash. Now, I find that curious because what that indicates is that they don't care what the vote is. They're going to do it their way anyway.
Yeah.
And that seems rather belligerent.
It is exactly that, and frankly, when he talked in his first clip there about waiting for the Supreme Court's wording, what is it that how could they possibly find that the citizens of St. Paul have a charter that gives them the authority to place this on the ballot? I mean, he seems mystified that there is such a document, and he's waiting for them to, that is the Supreme Court, to send him another piece of paper that says, oh no, it's that contract we thought was so wonderful. He's never going to get that from the Supreme Court. If he would just read the charter and understand, if he would talk to an attorney, maybe who's not the city attorney, because obviously they steered him the wrong way.
Well, perhaps he could talk to Mr. Joseph, the attorney who argued the case in support of the charter.
The attorney that the citizens had to pay. That's right. The citizens paid him, and he did a fabulous job, and he got to speak a lot less of the time at the final hearing, as you know, Diana. And again, the Supreme Court had to come into special session. They don't typically hear cases in August.
Right. Now, we have, in our next clip, Mayor Carter is going to continue to talk about the city's perspective on trash collection.
Unless otherwise indicated by the Supreme Court, the city's contract with the haulers remains in effect and we will continue to operate under its terms. Haulers will still collect garbage with the financial obligation shifted from individual ratepayers to all property owners in St. Paul through our city general fund. Our Office of Financial Services estimates the cost for collection in 2020 will be $27.1 million and require a 17.4% increase on our property tax levy.
Now, he indicated that they are going to continue to collect the trash. And from the way that he talks about this contract, it's as if he is going to continue the contract even if the city had a way out of the contract. And so that he's willing to go out there and continue the contract and collect all those financial obligations to the haulers under the contract, even if the city has an out under the contract. Now that, of course, seems very contrary to the best interests of your community, because now, in essence, what he's telling you is that because he wants to go forward with the contract, even though the city more than likely could get out of the contract, that he wants to raise all the extra money out of your pocket because he wants to be true to this contract, which he wouldn't necessarily have to continue with.
Yeah, and we do need to note, in case people didn't notice it on last year's bill, that we are being charged, those of us who pay property taxes in St. Paul, we're getting assessed just under $25 per household. Any one of the people that have the units, they're paying more. In other words, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, for the service. And, Diana, we're paying for those carts. In the old days, the contractor, our garbage man, I'm going to call him the garbage man, he brought a cart with his name on it and he put it out there. Okay, maybe it had a cost and it was built into the price of the garbage. But it's amazing how we didn't have a tax levy that had to pay for that, and we had prices on the trash collection which were half of what we're paying now.
So what, in essence, Mayor Carter is trying to do by throwing away around these big numbers and saying, oh, it's going to cost this much and the city's on the hook for it, no matter what the vote turns out to be, what in essence he's doing is that he's trying to scare you into either not voting at all, which isn't that voter suppression? I thought that he was against voter suppression.
You would think
but
so.
This is indeed a form of voter suppression. Or he's trying to scare you into thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to cost so much, I'm going to have to vote yes, I guess, to keep that ordinance in place because, oh, what's the alternative? Except here we have a part of the contract between the city and the consortium, which talks about those events of default, in which case then either party, if the other one has defaulted, that there are remedies to say, we get to be compensated. So, for instance, if the city decided not to do the bill collecting for the consortium of those bills that haven't been paid up, well, that would be an event of default where the consortium could come back and say, okay, you, the city, have defaulted on the terms of the agreement that you're going to be our bill collector. Well, here's what it says that the city events of default are. It says the failure of the city to observe or perform any material covenant, representation, warranty, condition, obligation, or agreement on its part to be observed or performed under this contract. Now, when you put the question on the ballot, whether or not the people decide the ordinance should stay or go, that is not the city as defined in this contract. That is the power of the people voting basically on a referendum to say that an ordinance is either to stay or to go. And that is an action of the people under their charter, and it is not an event or an action of the city as the city is defined under this contract. Now, why it is that, of course, the city wants to ignore maybe that little detail, I have no idea, other than the fact that they want their way even though they lost. So let's take a look at the next clip where the mayor continues.
Let me be clear. Our first responsibility is to public health and public safety. It's our responsibility to ensure that always in St. Paul, we can answer the very important question, who will pick up the trash next week? That has always been our top priority. That will certainly continue to be our top priority. And it's a great thing that we've been able to go through this process and gain the clarity that we've already gained from the Supreme Court and the clarity that we expect to gain as they explain their rationale.
Our top priority is to answer the question, who's collecting the trash? Now, I can tell you that from all the other meetings that I've been watching with regard to St. Paul, I don't think that that is their number one issue they're wrestling with. I think that from many reports that they're struggling with trying to get economic development. Isn't that much more weighty than worrying about making sure that you can answer the question as to who is collecting the trash?
Yeah, when you've got a downtown that is absent of economic activity to the extent that St. Paul is, we can't fill up the ramps anymore even.
Right.
They're missing the fact that in St. Paul we have a tremendous amount of poverty. And that is a reality that they have to come to grips with. We've got roads, Diana, that are falling apart. I mean, on and on it goes.
Right, and just only a few shows ago, we had the report that we featured where the St. Paul police chief was in front of the city council, and he spoke about exactly that, about the poverty leads to incidents of crime. It leads to people needing work, that it affects so many things in the city. That is the biggest issues in St. Paul. It isn't being able to answer the question, who's collecting the trash?
No, when you have 300 plus people, 330 I think the number was, that are going to lose their jobs at Walmart, because Walmart's leaving St. Paul, when you've got another 125 or more people that are losing their jobs at Kmart because they're leaving, and then there's all the people that lost their jobs at Sears that's been closed for a while, the retail environment is not good. And there needs to be some change in the strategy here, folks. And the idea that you can just go along and keep asking the public to pay more taxes when you've got a declining commercial sector means only one thing, that homeowners are going to pay higher taxes. Because guess what? When the county assessor goes and evaluates the value of empty commercial buildings, they go down in value, not up. They pay less taxes when they're empty and nothing's happening.
Yes.
And that's where we're at.
Yep, very definitely. Now let's continue with Mayor Carter's speech.
Again, unless the Supreme Court explicitly says otherwise, we still have a contract in place that the city intends to continue to operate under. And so should the vote say no on November, the financial obligation for that would shift to the city through our general fund, through our property tax levy, as opposed to those rates that are currently funded by ratepayers.
He is definitely not looking at any way to get out of this contract at all. It is very clear that he only sees one direction, and that is to continue this contract, so that whether or not the vote is yes or no, He wants to make that irrelevant. Again, voter suppression. Why go out to vote if it doesn't matter either way? Because, Mayor Carter says we're going to continue the contract anyway. Why? What does it matter if we go out to vote? Shouldn't we just stay home?
Well, folks, when the mayor tells you his top priority is to answer the question, who's going to pick up the trash, I think he's doing a better job representing the garbage companies than he is representing you. And you, the voters, I know are going to show up in big numbers because, when we had that vote on that stadium a few years ago, we had a record turnout. It seems to me it was over 70,000 voters. We had a huge turnout for that. And people in St. Paul love to tell the government, no. They love to tell the government, you're doing a little bit more than we can afford, because typically that's what's going on a lot. And we just built 2 new stadiums where we got no consultation. So, if you want to come out to the polls, let's send a message that we need a little more of a conservative look at our finances, because in the situation we're in, if we don't put down the shovel, Mr. Mayor, and stop the digging of the big hole, we're going to be in worse shape. And as Diana Longry has just read, there's a place in the agreement that gives you an exit. All right, so it's time for the city attorney to be crafting an exit strategy. And frankly, when we're talking about who's going to pick up the garbage, I suspect a good competitive enterprise solution will result in some prices coming down and some of the same people that used to pick up the garbage being in that business, and maybe we'll have some new players in town.
Right.
So we'll be paying less, getting more service. And the idea that somehow the problem with our streets are the garbage trucks is an absolute undocumented. I mean, show me the study that says trucks going down the alley put the big potholes there. You know where the potholes are in my neighborhood? They're on the streets. The alleys look pretty darn good, as a matter of fact. It's where has anybody ridden up, south of the Adena Park there, Marie, down in Railroad Island? I mean, I ride the bus. And it's like a washboard. That bus is shaking. I mean, those nuts are going to fall off one day on that bus because the road is in horrible condition.
In other words, you get your teeth ground without actually grinding your teeth.
Well, I mean, and it's just, and Rice Street. I mean, and what are we doing? We came here today, we went down Maryland, and the county has taken away 2 lanes for traffic. And so what we got is 1 lane left for traffic. They say it's a 3-lane program. No, it's not. It's a 2-lane program. You got 1 east and 1 west, and all the traffic that's coming off the interstate was lined up almost to Arkwright from Maryland, from Payne in Maryland. That is ridiculous. This is the nonsense that the elected officials in this town are driving us through, and they're not fixing the roads, and that's what we need. We need better roads. Mr. Mayor.
Respectfully.
Yes, very respectfully.
So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and go back to the arguments before the Minnesota Supreme Court when the court started to raise some questions about what happens if this is placed on the ballot, what happens to the contract, what happens to trash collection. I mean, is there going to be, just utter chaos? Well, now let's move to clip number 29, and we'll be resuming our film footage from the Minnesota Supreme Court argument. Let's take a look.
And I have this concern also is, what if this thing is on the ballot and the morning after November, whatever, the day, election day, the city of St. Paul wakes up and they find we don't have organized collection, we don't have unorganized collection, what's going to happen to the trash? It's a very practical question with regards to the effect of this referendum. What's your answer?
My answer, Your Honor, is that's the city's responsibility to solve the problem. We are, by November, Your Honor...
They've got September and October to solve the problem?
Not exactly, Your Honor. Again, the referendum was brought to them in October. And if the charter had operated the way that it should have been allowed, to operate, or if the referendum operated the way it should have been allowed to operate, the ordinance would have been suspended immediately. That would have
That
happened in
isn't the
October.
world we're living in.
Well, that's right.
Well,
That's what I understand, Your Honor.
So that's the question. What happens? And now, of course, Attorney Joseph, he indicated, well, that's the city's problem. They have to solve that. Now, certainly there are state statutes that require municipalities to manage their waste in their communities, and they can do that many different ways. Organized trash collection is just one of those ways. It's not the only way.
When the citizens, I believe, when they vote to terminate this ordinance and put us back in a competitive posture where people can reduce their costs of this program and begin to share the services again and do the things that we used to do to collect the trash quite efficiently, that we have, again, the good news being it's an election year. And if you don't want to go with the mayor's program of paying higher taxes for this contract that he seems to be holding tight to his chest, then you need a new city council, because the city council can fashion a new method, a new means. And at the end of the day, the people who are picking up the trash, that is their business. Their business has been capitalized with a lot of trucks and a lot of employees that do one thing. Those garbage trucks are pretty good at one thing, taking your trash down to Newport, okay? Or just past Newport there for the separator that the Ramsey County and Washington County have. And, the idea that somehow all those guys are going to be sitting around and the trash is going to be piling up, they're going to have no work, the trucks are going to be idle, and your trash can's going to be overflowing is ridiculous.
And one of the justices asked, well, before we got to this point, what did St. Paul have? So I believe that is our next clip, so let's take a look.
I have a question that's confused me on this. I went back and looked at St. Paul's ordinance on garbage hauling and found stuff in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And then I couldn't find anything in the 80s and post it. Was there anything on the books before 220 went into place that dealt with garbage hauling?
Your Honor, I think the reason it's confusing is because, for the same reason that 443 is so strange, this idea of Chapter 443, because St. Paul used to have organized hauling, then converted to an open system, and now we're looking at converting
But they
back.
didn't have anything on the books when there was an open system, right?
I believe that's correct, Judge.
So I don't understand why everybody's so concerned about not having something on the books. I'd like the city of St. Paul to actually answer that question, especially your argument related to 443. If you are saying you're required to have something on the books and you didn't, I don't see how that argument stands up. But
okay, so it sounds like apparently for a period of time, St. Paul actually didn't even have an ordinance that required anybody to even have a contract of their own with a trash hauler to take their trash away. Now, Maplewood, they had an ordinance that said every resident has to have trash collection picked up, but then you went and you made your choice of hauler, you negotiated your contract, and if you didn't like the service, you told them they were not to come back the next month, and you hired somebody else. So here we have again then that consternation of, okay, what are we going to do after all of this, when in fact, before this, St. Paul had nothing on the books.
Well, Diane, I have to say, and you mentioned Maplewood a couple of times tonight, and I've been to some forums where the people in the audience know about Maplewood, and they say that the costs are less. But I got to tell you, you and I, we both had a lot to do for a while over in Maplewood, you as the mayor and I as the city manager. And all the time that I was there, almost 2 years, I didn't have one complaint from a citizen about their residential hauling services. One complaint only on the commercial side because they were supposed to start at 6 in the morning, and one morning somebody started a little early. One complaint in 2 years on the trash business, and only on the commercial side. Folks, this is not rocket science. People have a business, they want to do a good job, they want to keep you as a customer, they want to keep the rates affordable, they're not trying to beat you up. Frankly, the state has a tax on waste hauling. The county has a tax on waste hauling. The city taxes it on the property taxes. I mean, and there's, all these taxes. Frankly, if the city, the state, the county would all get together, we could really cut the cost of this and make it a lot easier. So frankly, we need to be looking at the people in the government and what they're doing with the money that they're collecting, because frankly, yes, they're operating the facility down in Newport. That's great. But, all this other stuff, and frankly, since China is no longer taking the plastic and the paper and the cardboard and all the rest, really the only thing in our recycling bucket that brings $1 is the aluminum. And the cost of collection on that program is $58 a year for our recycling for a single-family dwelling under last year's tax. So there's a lot of evaluation about what we're doing.
And I think you brought up a good point here in that with the changes in the market with regard to recycling, that maybe we need to rethink some of the ideas that we have regarding recycling and trash collection, because if half of the items that you're putting in your recycling can actually can't be recycled any longer because there's no market for them, that means that they're trash. And so what does that mean ultimately then for being responsible and getting rid of the refuge of existence?
Right, and the market values uncontaminated paper, uncontaminated cardboard. They do not want pizza grease all over the stuff. They don't want the drippings out of the aluminum beer cans and the soda bottles all over the stuff. Honestly, I think I heard Victoria Reinhardt, county commissioner, say that she went to Sweden, and in Sweden they take anything that gets contaminated out of the recycling process, and they deal with it as though it's trash. So the idea that we're going to have a sustainable enterprise with a so-called single sort, which if you think about it, there is no sort with a single sort system that we have in St. Paul. Everything's going into the same bucket, and the only thing that's worth anything in the bucket, frankly, at this point, is the aluminum. Steel to some extent, but honestly, the markets are not good. And if we have this great recession that the media keeps talking about, my God, we have the lowest unemployment that the state has seen in I don't know when. We have, I think, the 9th best housing market in the country, or 8th. And we're going to have a depression. Well, you know what? If that happens, the recycling thing is done. Because nobody's going to need that aluminum except for the guys making beer. I guess we'll be drinking a little more of that, right, Diana? But seriously, we got to think a little bit beyond today. And we got to think about a system that makes sense.
And not be entrenched in your commitment to the promises that you made to special interest groups. And I think that that's part of also why we have bad policies that continue to be made time and time again, because they can't go back and say, buddies, I know you supported me on this, but we have to reevaluate our thinking on this because it's just not working anymore. And so my promise I made to you last election cycle, I might have to change that this time around because the market has changed, because the economy has changed, because the trends have changed, because the demographics have changed. There's all kinds of things that can change your decision over time, but if you don't have the courage and the guts to change your decision and your direction because you're worried about what your special interest supporters are going to think about you, you're not really working for the people.
Yeah, and I think the city had a good thing going when we had separation. And I was on the Neighborhood Energy Consortium board representing my area on Payne Phelan, and we did not collect plastic at the time, not because we didn't want to collect it as good recyclers, but because there was frankly no market. So what is the point of telling people, oh, we're going to collect something to recycle it, when in fact it was going to end up in some sort of trash program, either buried in a landfill or sent to a plant to be burned. I mean, you know, we got to be honest with people about what we're doing and where this material is now going and what the market is. And the idea that you have to hold tight to everything that's ever been in the past with this stuff ignores the reality of what's going to make a sustainable future in the city.
Now, I believe we have time yet in our program for one more clip from the Minnesota Supreme Court. Let's listen in.
The subdivision used by St. Paul, to me, it seems clear that would be better used by a statutory city, where, yes, the only feedback that the voters have in a statutory city is the one public input hearing, which the council's free to ignore. But in a charter city, that's not the case.
Council, this is a clip that we discussed a little bit last week, talking about the state statute that gives a city two different options, that if they're looking at doing organized trash collection, that there's two different options they can choose from. And the argument is that one of those provisions is better suited for a charter city, whereas the other provision is better suited for a statutory city that doesn't have a charter. And that St. Paul chose that provision that is better suited for a statutory city, like, say, for instance, the city of Maplewood, where you don't have to worry about whether or not the residents of your community exercising their rights under a charter are going to bring a referendum. Whereas the other provision actually has time guidelines in it that would allow for that occurrence of people taking the initiative to bring forth a petition for a referendum to call an ordinance into question and put it on the ballot.
You know, another thing too, Dana, you know, we mentioned about Maplewood. You know, Maplewood, again, did not have organized collection until after, I believe both of us had left office, if you will. And it was an idea that generated a tremendous amount of controversy by someone who was elected in 2008 he took office. And he was there for 4 years, and he came in dead last the next time around and left the city, actually moved out. But the citizens were left with this, and in the meantime, they had public hearings where 300, 200 people would fill up the entire city hall area in objection of this program. People felt like this was not a problem, and that they felt that costs would be going up. Perhaps things have moderated a bit. They're not against the sharing, as I understand it, in Maplewood any longer.
And that is something that is a little different in Maplewood, in that one of the exceptions that I certainly was promoting when they were looking at having organized trash collection is that you could opt out if you could demonstrate other ways of taking care of your trash. So now, Mr. Copeland, thank you for being here on the program.
Enjoyed it.
Viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Our point is, for this statute to work, you have to have the ability to contract, and then you have to have the ability to enact ordinances that mirror the terms of the contract.
Could the city have structured the contract in a way that they enter the contract, but it's subject to the passage of the ordinance and any referendum time? Was there anything preventing the city, was there anything preventing the city from structuring into the contract that this contract only goes into effect after the ordinance is passed and after the time is expired for the people to take a chance? Because everybody knew that there was a referendum possibility here.
Just help me understand why the city of St. Paul, knowing that this could have ended up where we are today, would want to have embroiled in litigation rather than just allowing the citizens of St. Paul to put it on the ballot and to have a say in that. Tell me why that didn't happen.